Alright, welcome to your video lecture on hydrothermal vents. So hopefully, if you're watching this, it means you didn't tune into your Zoom. Zooms are really important. They give you live feedback on what's going on, and you can ask questions. But if this is the only way you can get your information, that's okay. But we do prefer that you come to the live Zooms. So we're learning about hydrothermal vents today. We're going to watch this video in class. I will link it. It is an awesome video talking about how they discovered hydrothermal vents and the kind of biodiversity that we see in those vents. So hydrothermal vents are found in the deep ocean, meaning that it's as dark as night, as dark as you can possibly imagine, no light at all. So we had no idea that these critters were living there until one day somebody turned some lights on. They brought cameras down to they knew the vents were there. They had no idea the life was there. So they brought cameras down to videotape the hydrothermal vents, and they were very surprised at the biodiversity, or the incredible, remember, life, diversity, different, so all the different life forms that were there, and there was actually a whole community and ecosystem thriving there. They first discovered it in 1977, in the Galapagos Rift, which is right off the coast of Latin America. There we go. They found these huge red tip tube worms right here. They found some fish that looked like ghosts that were white. They found shrimp with huge eyes. You really got to check out this video. It's a great introduction to what's going on and what we're learning about today. So I'll link that. But here's where your notes start. So what are hydrothermal vents anyways? They are basically deep cracks, or fissures is our scientific word. Fissures means cracks on the ocean floor that spew or push out very hot, mineral-rich water. That's what they are. So we knew that this is what they were doing. What we didn't know, again, was that there was a ton of species living and thriving in this place that wouldn't normally expect there to be a lot of life because of this hot water. But many animals adapted. Excuse me. Adapted, and they've got whole food webs there, which is pretty awesome. How do they form? So this is a little bit complicated, but they're crystals that are deposited by underwater volcanoes. The crystals form hollow, chimney-like vents that hot water flows through. So if you go back to this picture right here, this is one of those crystalline, and it's covered by some sediment now, so it's harder to see, but it's a crystalline or crystal hollow tube. Basically, it was once part of or near an underwater volcano, except no lava is coming out. The only thing that's coming out here is hot, mineral-rich water. So think like a chimney, and hot, mineral-rich water is flowing through it that was warmed up by an underwater volcano that's not far away. What's life like at these vents? Again, we didn't think there was going to be any life there. We were very surprised to find that we have a huge or wide variety of life. We see archaea, which is an ancient an ancient single-celled organism. So we talk about, if we go through the kingdoms, or the kingdoms, archaea is one animal. No. Archaea is one we don't talk about a lot. We have bacteria, protists, and then we've got multicellular eukaryotes. But we don't talk a lot about archaea. They are old or ancient single-celled organisms, so they have one cell, and they're actually the base of the food web. And what's awesome about these little boogers, so they're, just think of like a really old bacteria, they are what we call chemosynthesis. So you've heard of photosynthesis, and that's what plants and producers use here on the surface of the ocean and the terrestrial earth. They take energy from the sun along with some carbon dioxide and water and other minerals to produce their sugar or glucose. We know about photosynthesis. We've already studied it. But chemosynthesis is different. Instead, because there's no sunlight there, instead of taking the sunlight or using that energy, they actually use chemical compounds that are already present in the water and given to, or not given, but abundant because of the hydrothermal vent, and they take those chemicals and they actually make those chemicals into their glucose. Those are the base of the food web. If we didn't have those, if they weren't able to chemosynthesize or create food out of chemicals, create, chemo, we know, means chemical, so create chemical food, then we wouldn't have these food webs and there wouldn't be any life here. But because they are present and they can withstand the hot temperatures and they do chemosynthesis, we are able to have a very abundant food web or ecosystem. We often see no-eyed creatures or creatures without eyes there because they survive better. It's dark, they don't need their eyes, so they have evolved and adapted to not depend so much on sight and depend on their other senses. So those are generally much more enlarged, though we do see some organisms that do have eyes, but many of them do not. We see variations of starfish, which should actually say sea stars, sea sponges, I put sea stars twice, and giant clams. So we see lots of different kinds of life here. We've got giant clams, our bivalves. We've got our sponges, which are, can't remember the scientific word for sponge, but they can be very, very large, or they can be really small. It just depends. We've got sea stars, and then we've also got lots of fish that live here as well. So we've got a lot of life. The main sentence here, and I would star, we've got a wide variety of life. And I would also know what an archaea is and how they chemosynthesize. As always, typically as humans, we look for the economic interest or benefit in our systems. The economic benefit of hydrothermal vents, because we have a wide variety or diverse life there, we are interested in how we can use that life. So think biotechnology. We want to know if we can harvest some of the enzymes that those organisms use to go through their daily life, like our chemosynthetic organisms, ones that make food out of chemicals, and see if we can harvest some of those enzymes for our own good, perhaps for medical reasons, maybe just in the technology field. It just depends. But we want to know what we can do with those organisms. We also might want to know if they have compounds, if the organism might have a compound in them that we can use for medicine. So maybe they produce a certain kind of chemical that we could use for medicine, or maybe they combined can produce a chemical that we can use for medicine. And then we also are interested in the metals that form because of the vent. So we could harvest some of that metal as well. But if you can imagine, if we harvest any of the organisms or any of the metal, we run into possibly disturbing the ecosystem. So whenever we talk about economic benefits, just like we did with wetlands, we got to remember, okay, we can make some money off of them, but what happens if we destroy the ecosystem? So you've got to keep that in mind too as we think of how we can use these ecosystems. How do we know they're there? In 1977, the Alvin, a submarine that can explore the deep ocean depths, so it was protected from all the pressure and the cold, and it could take humans down in it, went down into the ocean. It set out to find the volcanic ridge and happened upon a hydrothermal vent, and they were super surprised at what they found there. Like I said, they didn't expect a lot of life there, so it was very surprising that they found that. And lastly, this isn't in your notes, but it's something that I wanted to give you a thought to think about as I leave you. What's interesting about where these vents occur? So if you look here, we've got the lines represent plate boundaries. A red line is a divergent. Divergent means dividing. A purple line is a convergent line. They are colliding. And a yellow or green line, don't know what color you see there, I see green. That is a transform boundary. They're slipping past one another. And all the red stars are vent locations. So what do you think is interesting about where our stars occur based on the placement of our plate boundaries? That's the question I want to leave you with and something I want you to think about as we move on to the next lecture. The main points of this lecture: hydrothermal vents, we did not expect the life there to be that much life there. We were very surprised at what we saw. And that diversity. So not only did we find organisms living in these harsh environments because they're full of chemicals and they're really, really hot water, so we didn't expect anything to be there, but we found not only just one thing living there, we found a lot of things living there, and we found a whole diverse ecosystem, which was awesome. But I want you to think about that as I leave you. All right. Have a good day, guys. Email me if you have questions.